Welcome to the Separation Anxiety in Dogs Decoded podcast. I am your host, Ness Jones, and we'll be deep diving into all things separation anxiety. But before we get started, please make sure you like this episode, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your notifications so you never miss another one. And don't forget, if you are interested in joining my easy step-by-step training program to resolve separation anxiety in your dog, you'll find the link in the show notes. Now let's get started. In this episode, I'm going to be discussing something that could be viewed as a little bit contentious, or maybe not. It depends on your point of view. And that is all about medication. Should your dog be on medication? It's quite a big subject, and I'm only going to touch on a few things. This isn't going to be a great big long episode. I do urge you to jump onto my YouTube channel, which is at Ness Jones, and on there you'll find an interview with Dr. Chris Parkle. He is an amazing vet behaviorist, and he talks about medication, when to use it, and when maybe we don't need to, what type of medication, and when we can phase it out, and all those sort of things. So really good interview. However, there's a lot of confusion as to when we should maybe think about getting medication, and there's also a lot of pushback about using medication. So I want to talk about those things. Caveat to all of this is I am not a vet. So any of these conversations need to be had with a skilled professional. And let's not forget too that not all vets are experts or specialists in a certain subject. So just like you go to a doctor, a normal GP, some of them have a special interest in maybe diet, or maybe they have a special interest in men's health or women's health or skin issues. And it's the same with vet GP. Some of them may have a certain interest under the veterinary umbrella, and that may or may not be medication. So if you go to your normal GP and you don't feel like you're getting the right answers, you may have to find another vet that is a little bit more skilled in medication. So should your dog be on medication? As I said, the first thing you need to do is talk to your vet about it. However, I'm not a believer that all dogs should be on medication. I really honestly do not believe that all dogs need to be medicated if they have separation related behaviors. Now, I use that term very specifically. I'm not saying separation anxiety. I'm talking about separation related behaviors, which is the umbrella term for the behaviors, the unwanted behaviors that we see when we leave the dog alone. I have had plenty of clients whose dogs are not on medication. I have never believed that the dog has needed to be on medication. All they needed was to learn about feeling confident and feeling safe when mum or dad walk out the door. Those dogs did not need to be on medication. They just needed the training. And that's all they needed. So I think that is why the conversation with the vet is important, because they will be able to tell you if your dog really truly does need to be on medication or not. When I might suggest to a client that they should have that conversation with the vet is if the dog has generalized anxiety. Now, I'm not talking about a dog that's reactive to other dogs, or maybe has some trauma in its past and is reactive to people. Maybe there's some fear reactivity, fear aggression even. That's a topic for a completely different conversation. I'm specifically talking about home alone time. Now, a dog that has generalized anxiety is literally afraid of the world. They step outside the front door and everything is scary. They are reactive to everything. Reactive in the sense that they are afraid of everything and they literally can't cope. Now, that dog is living in fight, flight. And can you imagine feeling anxious 24/7? That horrible feeling in the stomach area, your cortisol's flowing constantly. It's just a horrible way to live. It shortens lifespans. It's really, really bad for you. I do feel it is a kindness that those dogs are put on medication. There's so many different types of medication. And again, that is a conversation for a vet. If you're not getting the answers from vets in your area, then you can reach out to a vet behaviorist who is more skilled in the use of medication. Now, the other problem is that many clients don't want to put their dog on medication, and there's a number of reasons for that. And I understand that nobody wants to say, oh, I have to put my dog on medication. I'm sure there's quite a lot of guilt associated with going down that road. And I do understand. I do understand. But if your dog has got generalized anxiety, it is a kindness. Now, some people will say, well, it's turned my dog into a zombie. Now, there's two things here. When a dog initially goes onto medication, we are going to see some changes in their behavior potentially. And that's okay, but that's why we need to keep that open conversation with the vet. Part of me does wonder, though, and I don't have any research or stats on this, but part of me does wonder whether the dog that maybe suddenly turns into a zombie, whether that is a guardian perception as opposed to what is actually going on. A lot of guardians don't appreciate that dogs sleep a lot during the day. They can sleep, and it depends on the dog, but up to 17 hours. It also depends on the age, by the way. So a senior and a puppy are going to sleep more than a young teenage dog, for example. But dogs in general can sleep between 14 and 17 hours a day. That's a big chunk of time. And I do wonder with the dogs that are put on medication and then the guardian reports that the dog is a zombie, I do wonder whether perhaps that dog wasn't getting enough sleep, and what the guardian is actually seeing is now suddenly a dog that is getting the appropriate amount of sleep because finally they can relax and they're not living in that fight, flight, and that tension constantly. So it's a really interesting conversation, and I wish I knew if that was the case or not, but I think it potentially, at least in some cases, it will be. Yes, if your dog is put on medication, you may see some side effects, and we must keep talking to the vets and say, I am seeing this. There's different types of medication. So you have your daily medications, which are like just given on a daily basis. And then you have your situational medications, which are given, for example, if a dog is scared of thunderstorms and you know there's a storm coming, you might give them a situational medication that is just used for that time. Or perhaps you have an emergency, you can't find cover for your dog, and your only option is to give a situational medication. You might use it then. I will add, though, it's really important with any medication, the first time you use it, to use it while you are there. So you do not want to give your dog any kind of medication and walk out the door and just assume that they're not going to have a reaction to it, because our bodies react differently to different medications. And that brings me to my next point, which is that you must keep whatever medication you're giving your dog, you must keep that open dialogue with your vet in case things change. So you would not believe the number of people that say to me, or clients that come to me and say, I tried the medication, it didn't work. Okay, so did you try it hand in hand with training? No. Okay, so maybe that was why, or maybe it was the wrong medication. Now think of somebody with a heart condition. You might go to your doctor and they say, okay, take these pills. And maybe your body isn't great on these pills. Maybe they're the wrong ones for your body. So then you have to go back to your doctor and say, hey, this happened. I had this reaction, or they didn't help me, and this, whatever it is. And they say, oh, okay, so these ones weren't the right ones for you. Let's give you these ones instead. And it's the same for our dogs. So any medication that you give your dog could be the wrong one. Also, if you're giving it daily, it can take 6 to 8 weeks to see effect. So you might see some initial symptoms, some maybe a dry mouth, or they've gone off their food, or whatever it is. Sometimes we'll see a paradoxical effect with some medications, which means the opposite of what we're looking for happens. So instead of the dog being relaxed, they can actually be hyped up. That's, again, a conversation for your vet. So, but let's say your dog is being put onto a particular daily medication. Your vet says, look, we're going to give it 4 to 8 weeks. I said 6 to 8 weeks. I like 6 to 8 weeks, but your vet may say 4 to 8 weeks before we see any difference in behavior. Okay, and then maybe we get to the end of that time and we're not seeing a difference. We can't say, well, I tried that and give up. What we then need to do is talk to our vets again and say, hey, do we need to? They will say, right, okay, so let's maybe up the dosage, or maybe let's add another medication on top of the one that you've got. Or perhaps they may say, this one's inappropriate for your dog. We have to phase it out. And unfortunately, that does take time. We don't just go cold turkey. We have to gradually phase it out. And then let's add this one back in. And then again, we start right back at the beginning. Is this the right one? Is it the right dose? Does the dose need to be increased? Do we need to add something to it? So it's quite a complicated thing, and we can't just try it and say it didn't work. The other important thing to say is that the medication as a standalone, and this goes for natural remedies and it goes for prescribed remedies with a vet, that none of these can be used in isolation. They facilitate any training you do, but you can't give them to your dog and say, right, my dog's suddenly cured. That's not going to happen. What I'm saying is there are no magic pills, but they can help. They can facilitate the training. So don't despair. Like I said, and look, I really want to emphasize this. I don't believe all dogs should be on medication, but there are definitely some dogs that will be helped so well with medication. And let's say maybe the dog isn't on medication and you start a training program and it's going well, but maybe you just can't break through a certain period of time for whatever reason. And that's going to be individual for each dog. So maybe or the dog plateaus and we just can't go any further. Then that might also be a case of let's have that conversation with the vet and see if we can just get over this hurdle and help the dog. But a dog for me that is in fight, flight constantly, step outside the door and the world is a big scary place, those dogs might need that extra help to get them just to be able to cope with the world, aside from training, but just to be able to cope with their lives and starting to enjoy life as opposed to being fearful of it. As I said right at the beginning, Dr. Chris Parkle is a vet behaviorist. I will put the link in the show notes actually, because I think it's really worthwhile watching that video episode that we did with him. And he's a knowledgeable guy. He's amazing. And he has so much information to give. It's really, really fantastic information, great episode. And I think you guys will really, really appreciate it. If you're sitting on the fence about medication, maybe it will alleviate some of your fears. But either way, make sure you do, if you do go down that road, that you must team it with some type of training, some type of gradual exposure, desensitization to safe absences. We want your dog to feel confident when you walk out the door. You have been listening to Ness Jones on the Separation Anxiety in Dogs Decoded podcast. Don't forget to check out the show notes to learn more about my programs and how I can help you with tailored training. Until next time.